me to introduce Arjang. Arjang is from Trendi. He started his career as a chemical engineer in the oil and gas industry, and then he took a hard turn into sustainability, which is a really nice thing, a degree in industrial ecology from the Technical University of Delt, Netherlands. He has worked as a sustainability consultant for the chemical manufacturing, construction, and agricultural sectors using data-driven decisions. Arjang is currently the head of the Impact Lab at Trendi, a food waste upcycling company based out of Vancouver. Arjang, over to you.
So, Margaret, you mentioned food waste is something that people are interested in. I hope so. We all consume food, or at least I hope we all do. Waste is a part of that. It's not just a part of what we generate ourselves, but what's embedded in the supply chain and the food system that we enjoy so much every single day. So before I get into the details about Trendi and what we're doing, I wanted to talk about something first. So I read this article last year in the BBC about Canada getting its first climate change induced famine. Now, this one kind of slipped under the radar for most people, so I don't blame you if you didn't catch it. We've had droughts, forest fires, so bad that entire harvests are being lost, stockpiled supplies running low across the entire country. And, the victims of these things are always the most underserved communities, the young, the elderly that really need the nourishment. So, climate change is this issue that we've sidestepped and debated for so long that it's coming back to hit us where it hurts, our stomachs, and, our most basic primitive need to provide sustenance and nutrition. So in times like these, our natural instinct is to just go out there and grow even more food. Already there's calls across the globe for agricultural output to increase, either by using more land or growing more intensively. But, for those that are in the sustainability world and understand how different systems interact with each other, they realize there's a problem with that kind of narrative of just grow more. So there's a concept in agricultural economics called the yield gap. Simply put, it's just how much food is being produced compared to how much could be produced under perfect conditions. Let's say, imagining a year where there's no droughts, not too much water and flooding. How much really produce could there be? Now let's take that concept and apply it to the food system as a whole. How much food is actually consumed by the end user, us, versus how much could have been consumed under perfect conditions. So if there was no loss in the system, if everything that was produced made it to people. Now, unfortunately, globally, this food production gap is around 40% across the whole supply chain. 40% of all food produced is lost and falls into the gap, never to be consumed. But the tricky thing is that the gap itself is hungry, and it devours more than just like the fruits and vegetables that are lost to it. It also devours the critical agricultural resources such as fertilizer and water that go into food production, the hard work and labor of farmers and farm workers that go into growing our food, and the services from natural ecosystems such as good soil and pollinators. So we need to close the gap, not feed it anymore. Because the more the gap consumes, the hungrier it gets, the more food we throw away, and the more food we try to grow to make up for what's being lost, the more we're going to contribute to climate change, the greenhouse gas emissions, and this makes the gap grow even more. And as we saw in the article, the more we contribute to climate change, the harder it will be to grow food, which again makes the gap grow. So the more we try to feed people using the same strategies we've always used, the harder it'll get. So there's kind of a diminishing returns effect here. So we need to close the gap, not feed it more. And that's where companies like Trendi come in. So Trendi is part of a constellation of companies, NGOs, communities, each with their own solutions and niches, trying to put an end to the issue of food loss and making sure that the food products that we put so much effort into producing make it into the hands, or rather the stomachs, of society. So using our on-site drying units called Biotrim, which I'll talk about a bit more, we at Trendi rescue food from farms and food processors that would otherwise be wasted. That's kind of our niche. So this rescued food can then be used in all sorts of applications, from being raw ingredients for soups, baked goods, and drinks, to even our own line of automated smoothie vending machines called Hydration Station. So we're even looking into how components from the stems, leaves, roots of the plants can be used from everything from cosmetic production to construction materials, really making sure that no nutrients, none of the resources and the effort that go into food production are lost to the gap. So this is how we at Trendi are trying to close the gap and not feed it even more. Now, I have a bit of a confession to make. So this article about climate change-induced famine in Canada is not real. The actual article is about Madagascar. So some of you might not know, Madagascar last year, food production plummeted due to climate change-related droughts. And it's one of the first cases where we're seeing the effects of climate change impact people and cause a crisis. Now, this affected over 1 million people who became at risk of dying from starvation. And it's been a warning sign for countries all over the world about the future that awaits us if we ignore the gap. So with solutions that try to address the food loss issue, we can make sure that feeding people, not the gap, becomes easier, because the preservation of food makes our food system more resilient to shocks and stresses such as climate change, labor shortages, or even, God forbid, another global pandemic. So if a grower can't get their produce off the farm due to supply chain challenges, they can dry it, store it, sell it later when the issue clears up. If a sudden heat wave ripens a field before a grower has had time to harvest it, even though they can't sell it in grocery stores anymore, they can still preserve that produce instead of letting it rot in the fields. And then if another country faces a famine, they can get the equivalent nutrition of 10 tons of fruits in a 1-ton shipment without having to worry about costly and difficult refrigeration. Now, so this is how we at Trendi are trying to address the problem at a global scale. So I just wanted to start off with this kind of narrative to bring a new light to the food waste issue, because a lot of people, when they think about food waste, they think, oh, it's just bad because it's the effort that we put into things that's being lost. But it's really about, it will come back to our ability to feed our society in the end, as things get more and more difficult as we go into this period of global warming that we're, seemingly can't avoid anymore. So, I've talked about the impacts. Let's talk about the economics. The GDP of global agriculture is about 3.4 trillion USD. The estimated value of global food waste just from farms is 370 billion USD. So that's 10% of agriculture GDP that's being lost right now. And, there's a lot of different drivers. If it's easy to say food loss is bad and let's stop it. I think no one will disagree there. But it really comes down to the drivers and what is really the cause. When we started off Trendi, there was a narrative inside the company that it was fruits and vegetables that don't look nice, that grocery stores aren't accepting because, they're wonky, they're different colors, and they're saying no, and it's being thrown away. But that's just one of the causes of food loss. So merchant criteria is one of them. Policy is another. There's actually a lot of food safety policy out there that is, trying to protect people against pathogens in the food system. And it calls for the wasting of entire harvests if there's a problem with a part of it. I'm not going to say, let's use that for food, but that can be used for something and doesn't need to be thrown away. Overproduction is a big issue. There's a lot of market fluctuation these days, as anyone can see. food prices, jumping up and down like a yo-yo, how can farmers who need to plan for production over a year in advance adjust to these things? And then we're also fighting time. Food rots. It's one of the interesting. It's one of the few industrial sectors where there's such a short time limit on the product. You look at electronics. An iPhone sitting in stores isn't going to go bad, but food within a short period of time will. So how do you make sure that you don't struggle with that fight? And it's in Canada, it's a bit less of an issue because we don't have a crazy hot climate yet. But in places in the global south, so South America, Africa, Asia, even Australia, those places really struggle with maintaining their food cold enough to keep it fresh so it gets to the consumer without being wasted. Climate effects, like we've talked about, anyone out in BC will tell you there's been forest fires like crazy this past year, heat domes that have affected crop production. And, funnily enough, there was a drought a couple of weeks after the forest fires that isolated all of the greater Vancouver region. So crops literally couldn't make it out of the farms because of the flooding on the roads. So they just had to sit there on the farm and rotting. And then global affairs, everyone's talking about the war in Russia and how it's impacting wheat production, but it also impacts fertilizers. And that's one of the bigger challenges that farmers are having to face right now is fertilizer costs are going up. Because fertilizers, some of you might not know, are a non-renewable resource if you're talking about mined phosphorus, and there's a limited stock of that. So all these kinds of things are what contribute to food waste and food loss at the farm stage. And so what we do as a company, and I talked about this a bit earlier, we have these lines of equipment called Biotrim. They're freeze drying units. And the difference is instead of sourcing food waste from a bunch of different places and having farmers transport the trucks of food waste to us and things spoiling on the way, we're actually taking our solutions, we've modularized it and scaled it in such a way where we can take it, put it on the farm, and so that the farmers can process it as soon as possible. So as little food waste is lost as can be managed. And so the footprint on our equipment is specifically designed to fit on a farm while being able to process the kind of food loss rates that farmers experience. And so talking about the output, I don't know if you guys have seen this in the grocery stores, they're getting more and more popular, but you'll see like bags of freeze-dried strawberries, blueberries, mangoes. I'm seeing them more and more in my local grocery store here in Montreal. But that's the kind of product that we make. So freeze-dried products are products where all of the water has been removed from them. Think astronaut food. Astronaut food is freeze-dried. So most produce is around 85 to 95% water. So by taking all of that water out, we're reducing the weight of the whole batch by 90%, meaning that's a lot less transportation costs having to be incurred by the growers. At the same time, the freeze drying process, because it's not like heat-based dehydration, so if you stick something in the oven and let it dehydrate, that actually breaks down some of the nutrients. Freeze drying doesn't do that. It preserves all of the nutrients that would have been in the original fruit or vegetable as well. And it makes it shelf stable because there's no water. It's not going to go bad. There's nothing to make it go bad. So if it's in the right kind of packaging where moisture can't get in, it's shelf stable for 18 months to 5 years. So imagine the opportunity that provides in terms of emergency relief for remote communities. You can send out all of this food or even store this food without having to worry about refrigeration. So those communities that are most vulnerable can get the nutrition that they need. You talk to most aid organizations, and what they say is the focus right now is really on providing calories. So they'll send staples such as potatoes, rice, things like that, for the most part, because that provides the calories for people to survive, but that doesn't have much nutrition built into it. So they're trying to fortify them. But with things like this, freeze-dried products, you can provide the nutrition as well, and combat the nutrition deficiencies that people in struggling areas face. So that's the end product, and that's what we at Trendi sell. Now, I want to talk about the economics of why a grower would even want to get involved with something like this, and what's in it for them beyond, the idea of rescuing food. Because it's great, but at the end of the day, farmers need to make money. What are they getting? So in the traditional food waste system, you have the different stages of production, and you have waste being generated at all parts of that process. And that waste really represents unrealized value, things that the farmers put money into, but then couldn't get money back out of. So in the Trendi Intervention scenario, what we do right now is we're focusing on rescuing farm waste. So let me see if we can get a laser pointer on this. No, never mind. So, oops. So we rescue food waste from the farm. That goes to our Biotrim units. So in and of itself, the diverting of waste away from landfills or other types of waste handling, that saves farmers cost. We talk to growers that say they spend $1 million a year on landfilling expenses. So these are the big greenhouses in Southern Ontario. Even if we didn't pay them to take this produce off their hand, they are saving $1 million. That's $1 million going into their pockets. Now, the output product, as I mentioned, shelf stable, this has the effect of further minimizing loss in the system. So normally where fresh strawberries, they would go through packaging, retail, and then the household, but then there's about like 5 to 10% that's lost in that process. That doesn't happen if the produce is freeze-dried. And then the other thing is freeze-dried powders, they have a very high market value. That's an industry that's actually really growing right now. And we're finding that there's a lot of buyers for freeze-dried produce, but not a lot of suppliers of that product. So this means that with the contracts that we write with farmers, we're able to provide them with profit sharing. So we give them a share of the revenues that we get from selling the powders, depending on the kind of agreements that we have, and really give them a bit more security to focus on their land, focus on their workers and the environment, and really make sure that their farming operation is allowed to thrive in an environment that's faced with so much uncertainty. So that's really the value that farmers and growers see in the business. So, moving on from the economic side, I quickly wanted to, because you guys are all in the business world, I really want to talk about some growing pains and some challenges that we face as an impact startup in the post-COVID age. One of them that Margaret Ann mentioned is remote work. So we're a fully remote company. I'm in Montreal. The company itself is mostly based out of Vancouver. Our COO is in South Africa, our CTO is in Australia. So we have people all over the place. So, aside from just getting the timelines to work and people being able to meet each other on Zoom, how do we build a culture? How do we build the interpersonal relationships required for a strong and healthy company? Because there's elements like trust and empathy that really go a long way. And a lot of the times, if you don't see that, or if you aren't given opportunities to develop that naturally, that presents a lot of challenges in the business when it comes to communication. And a business without good communication doesn't do very well, as most of us know. So that's one of the big challenges that we face, and that we're working towards. We have a lot of initiatives within the company to try to fly the more spread out people into Vancouver. So I go every 4 months or so. I'm going to go in 2 weeks just to see the team again, have some FaceTime working sessions, and really strengthen those relationships that we've built online. So then the next one is the circular economy is still new in Canada. So these types of impact businesses and businesses whose foundation is built out of upcycling something or reducing waste, that concept is still rather new in Canada. And I say that in comparison to places like Europe. So I worked in the Netherlands for the past 5 years, and there's a lot more understanding when you go out to potential partners and say, I'm a circular economy business, I'm upcycling food waste. Here in Canada, we still have a lot of explaining to do. And then people ask, okay, so how do you make money? And so that's something that we're trying to educate the people that we're trying to partner with, but it's an extra barrier that we're having to overcome, as opposed to companies in Europe who already know what circular economy is. They're the ones reaching out to us because they're looking for solutions. So that's kind of a mindset shift that I'm seeing in Canada. And I feel like that's something that's going to change over the next couple of years. So looking forward to seeing how that conversation grows. Then the next one is the agriculture sector is very risk averse. And that's not news to anyone. No one wants to be first on a new and untested solution. So just to give you a sense of where Trendi's at, Trendi's been, as a company, has been around for 2 years, but we really just started hiring and getting into pushing our solution over this past summer. And we initially wanted to start off just focusing on Canada. And one of the things that we realized is the Canadian ag sector isn't ready yet to spend money and invest in a solution that they haven't seen work on the ground. And what we found was that it's actually easier to do that in Europe. There's a lot more government incentives for it. And again, as I mentioned in the second point, companies are familiar with the types of benefits that they can get from these kinds of initiatives. So I'm happy to say we just signed our first full-scale commercial deal in Europe. And so we're going to be rescuing food waste there first. And then hopefully that'll give the agricultural sector in Canada an example and a showcase of how the system can work on their farms and what kind of benefits they can receive. So we're hoping that now that we've got that first one out of the gate, it'll make our lives a bit easier. And the last point that we struggle with as an impact company is impact versus profit. You know, there's a discussion that we had, a realization a couple of months ago where the prices of freeze-dried powder are so good that in some cases, farmers, it's more beneficial for them to just freeze-dry all of their produce and not just their waste. So what does that mean for an impact company, a sustainability company? Sure, there are benefits to freeze drying because you don't get waste throughout the food chain. But what's happening if we take away fresh produce from the shelves? What kind of impact will that have, both on consumer perception, but also on the ability of people to get their nutrients? So that's something that we're having to consider, because on the profitability side, of course, it makes sense. Freeze dry everything, there's no need to stop. But then the impact side is really making us stop and consider all the stakeholders involved and how that could impact the food system. So these are the kinds of extra considerations that we're having to take as an impact company to make sure that we're true to the mission and we're having a net positive impact on our food system. So with that, I will end my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. It was great presenting to you guys. And yeah, opening the floor up.